Bam.
Hi, this is T.C.Morrison, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
That's right. I got TC Tom on the show here. Tom is a former lawyer turned author, and lawyers and authors are both writers, but of a different ilk. Would you say are lawyers and writers? Are you guys even cousins in your discipline, or are you family at all? Because it's such different writing, and
Yeah,
there's so much reading required in both of them. But again, completely different kinds of disciplined reading.
yeah, that's a very interesting question. When I was practicing, I made a point of trying very hard not to write like a lawyer. Lawyers like to use a lot of fancy language and write convoluted sentences and have 80,000 footnotes in every brief. And I always thought that didn't make any sense. I tried to write in plain English that a judge could easily understand. And I think that stood me in good stead as a lawyer. And it was good practice for becoming an author after I retired.
At some point, though, when you are writing for a judge, you do have to cite the relevant cases. And then if you have to bring another case in, you've got to do that kind of work. It can't just all
Oh,
be prose.
oh no, that's absolutely true. Sure, you have to cite the applicable law, the applicable cases, but the way you do it, there are huge differences. You would be amazed at some of the stuff that huge law firms with really good, fine, smart people. You'd be amazed at some of the briefs they file. They go on and on and on forever. They're very convoluted, and in my experience talking to judges, they hate that. A lot of judges have rules about the briefs can't be more than 20 or 25 pages. I always like that because I always felt that you could say what you needed to say in 20 pages. So
Yeah.
I always tried to make my briefs read really well. Other lawyers in the firm didn't agree, and they condescendingly referred to my briefs as the Newsweek style of brief writing. But I took that as a compliment.
Right, right. I firmly believed when I was getting my various degrees that if you threw a couple of jokes in there and tried to entertain the professor, that worked for me. I was a relatively engaging and funny guy, and if I could prove my point and make it a little less painful, not write the same damned paper that everybody else was writing, that
Hmm.
I would get credit for that. And
Yeah,
I think overall that worked out.
sounds like it did. Yeah, that's a great idea.
So when you think about in the lawyer world, we're going to get to the writing of books part, but there's some work to do here. When you think about writing in the legal world, there are lawyers that are good at standing in front of people and talking. There are lawyers that are good at putting their nose in books and finding cases and loopholes, and that kind of thing. And there are probably great writing lawyers. Are there, and I guess there must be lawyers that are great at selling law, right? Like there's all kinds of lawyers that aren't necessarily going to be great at writing legal briefs. They're capable, but not great at it. Are there more than 4 or 5 kinds of lawyers who to do things particularly well that have really nothing to do with writing?
Well, in the litigation world, there's really a couple of aspects to it. Being able to write a brief is important because every case you have to file briefs with the court. But you also have to be able to stand up and argue your case to the judge or try a case to the jury. And I think there's a huge difference in the profession between lawyers who are decent at writing briefs and figuring out the law and lawyers who can stand up and present a case to a judge or jury in a way that is compelling. And I started trying cases when I was in the Air Force as a JAG lawyer. And I learned both how to try cases and how not to try cases during those 4 years. And I spent a lot of time reading about how to try cases and thinking about it. And through experience, I tried to come up with a way of presenting a case in a way that was easily understandable, that a judge or jury could relate to. And that's a slightly different skill from writing. And in some firms, you would have lawyers who would write the briefs and a different lawyer would try the case. Our firm was a much smaller litigation firm, and all of our litigators would do both. We prided ourselves on being able to both try the case and write the brief.
Sure, fair enough. One of the interesting things about being in the JAG world is that you get a chance to be a defender. You also get to be a prosecutor, and if you hang around long enough, you also can be a judge. You can do the whole thing within a career.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that you spent a lot of years in the military. I spent just 4 years, but frankly, it's the best thing I could have done straight out of law school. Had I gone to the big firm that I ended up with, I would have sat in the library and done research for 4 years, and I wouldn't have learned much. But boy, in the JAG Corps, from day one, you're on the front line, and you're trying cases. And I broke with my law. I went to a very fine law school, New York University School of Law. I broke with them and stopped supporting them because they would not allow JAG recruiters to come on campus and recruit from the law school. And wow. I told that was a huge mistake. Yeah. Huge mistake. I mean, the military needs law. They need doctors. They need accountants. They need lawyers. And to the extent that these elite schools don't like the military because they think it's, quote, too militaristic, what better way to influence the military than to send your graduates there to be lawyers?
Yeah.
That's the best thing I could have done.
How about that kid that barely has a chance to go to college, would have no chance to get a law degree except for maybe going and doing some time in the military, and to get an elite law degree, and then get to go actually practice law, come on. It's such a great thing. Same thing with the doctors, the nurses, the dentists, all these people that go do this stuff. It really is a fantastic mechanism for giving, somebody 2, 3, 4 legs up. And then if they happen to stay because they love it, these guys are not people who are on the front lines. These are people who are running dental clinics or whatever it is.
Yeah. No, it's I do not regret it at all. It's clearly the best thing I could have done for those 4 years.
Yeah. Interesting. This is going to be our transition. I'm going to take us there with this case. So I used to be the intelligence guy for a battalion, and we had a trainee who was going through, and he was accused, and there was video evidence that made it like, oh boy, it's really tough, of stealing a shirt. And he said, nope, I bought that shirt at a PX in another place before I came here. So of course we had the same shirt. I did not steal it. And so like, well, we're gonna use non-judicial punishment. And he's like, no, thanks. I'll take the full thing. Wow. And they're like, what are you crazy? And he's like, I didn't do it. I won't say that I did. I won't take any punishment for it. You're going to have to come after me with the full weight of the law if you want to come get me. And so they're like, okay, we will. And then so this goes on and on and on, because now it becomes a legal fight, but an administrative legal fight. And then it dawns on our commander. We're getting to the end of the fiscal year. And he's like, if we lose, he's like, I want this kid to win, one, because I want him to have a good career. I think he did it. But if we find out that he's guilty, we don't have the budget money to send him down to the county jail, which is what's going to have to happen in this case. Oh my God. And so by him simply fighting, we had this crazy legal outcome where we were rooting against ourselves because we really couldn't afford to, because it was going to be like 3 weeks in jail or something ridiculous for stealing this shirt. Yeah, it was crazy.
So they dropped the charges?
No, they saw it through and they found him innocent because there just wasn't enough there. But, it was 50-50. We didn't know what was going to happen. Yeah. And this case took the better part of a year too, by the way.
Wow.
And so what a crazy thing. And so you do have these crazy cases, and that must be part of what inspired you to write these stories that you write, because some of them you can't write because it's a private matter, but you could take and change a few things and all of a sudden you've got yourself a case. And I know a lot of lawyers, and everybody seems to have if I had the time and the money, I would sue somebody for such a thing because there is a legal argument to be made. And I would so there's all these things that you seem to have latched onto and said, hey, there's a whole world here that we could play in.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I had always thought there was a lot of humor in the law, and also that a lot of lawyers take themselves way too seriously. And so when I decided that I wanted to write a book, I made that decision in the final year of practice. I didn't want to write a legal thriller. They're a dime a dozen. I didn't want to write a serious book about law that nobody would read. But I had this view that there was so much humor in law and so much that could be done with that. And so I came up with this idea of creating these twin brothers who start up a class action firm and bring a series of bizarre cases for bizarre clients in front of bizarre judges. That's how I got into it.
When you create your cases that these guys are doing, treating chimpanzees and such, what where do you mine that from? Is that all from your imagination, or how much is that from your experiences?
That's a good question, because with one exception, every case, I've now written 3 books in this genre. Every case in all those 3 books is a riff on an actual case that was filed in an actual court of law. The chimpanzee case, there have been several cases in New York and elsewhere to free chimpanzees. What I did different with it was I invented an expert witness, a Dr. Doolittle, who's an animal communicator. And Dr. Doolittle actually goes and talks with the chimpanzees and gets their point of view as to why they want to be free and don't want to be in captivity. So that part was my invention. But the idea of lawsuits to free chimpanzees and elephants, there was a case to free elephants that went on for 2 or 3 years. The New Yorker wrote a huge story about that. So those were real cases, and I just took them and twisted them a bit and added my own riffs to them. I'm sorry.
Do you collect these? Do you collect these stories like over time? Like, oh, this is good. I'm going to put in my file folder, and I'll. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I do. Well, 2 things. In the very first book, the first third of the book, I went into the background of these twin brothers because they both started out with traditional big firms, and before they decided to get together and start a class action firm. And the cases that transpire in that first third of the first book were actually all based on cases that I personally handled when I was practicing at big firms. So those were real cases that I was intimately familiar with. The rest of them, I never did class action work, thank goodness. So all the class action cases were not based on my experience, but rather I read about them in legal publications. But more than that, most of them I read about in the good old New York Post. The New York Post has a way of finding, crazy things that go on in the country. And many of the cases that I developed into my stories came out of the New York Post. But they were all actual cases.
My buddy Mark, before he became a wills and trust attorney, started out as an accident attorney, and one of his clients was at a WWE event, and he got a little overexcited and found himself in the ring, and and participated a little bit and got injured, and. Normally that would be straight up and down criminal. You're not supposed to do that. Then the WWE, it might have been WWF back then, they used him in a promo. And it changed things because they didn't get his permission. They didn't pay him for that. Like, you never know what you're going to see on Tuesday nights, And so it became this real problem because, when it was criminals, like, maybe you got hurt, but you shouldn't have been in the ring in the first place. And now all of a sudden they'd used his likeness to promote their product. And what a crazy case that is. You think about like these things, and who knows what they get, and why the heck they wouldn't just cut him a check, and just say, hey, thanks, don't ever come again, and go away. But they took it to court for some reason.
I could do something with that case. That's funny. Actually, a couple of the cases I think there's a case in each of the 3 books that involve someone using the image of a person without their permission. In one case, the victim is always the same. It's Lydia Lovelace, who appears in all 3 books. She's everybody's favorite character. She's a former lap dancer who was discovered by one of the associates at Peters and Peters.
Yeah.
And she's in a series of cases, and someone's always stealing her likeness. In the current book that's just coming out, her likeness is used on a non-fungible token. A company has come up with a series of non-fungible tokens based on Playmates of the Month from a certain year. So that's in book 3. In an earlier book, her image is used on a pornographic video game. So that takes up several chapters in book 2. So that's a very common situation, using someone's likeness without their permission.
Another story, and you probably remember this, was when the Cubs were trying to figure out what they were going to be when they grew up into being a full-fledged team and everything else, along the way, and I used to live across the street from Wrigley. And so all of the rooftop owners, right, they not all of them, but a lot of them would have seats or some kind of signage that they benefited from financially. And the Cubs had never done anything about this for years. And so the basic belief was that they were stealing from the Cubs. But, you're a lawyer, they've never done anything about this. They've allowed them to build this business. And there's, you're going to go have to fight in court. So finally what the Cubs did was they just bought all those homes and said,
really?
We're just going to, that's how they solved it. Instead of having to go do a bunch of individual tort cases and all that kind of thing.
I remember seeing during baseball games people sitting outside on their roof or on their porch watching the game, and then they were charging admission to come. And
they set up stands, and they would use their view of the ballpark. And every time that the Cubs would get itchy, they were like, "We'll just take you to court and we'll fight this because you've done nothing about this for decades." And so it's our business. And so there was a real problem there. And so ultimately what happened was, instead of going to court, the Cubs just cut everybody checks for their buildings, and everybody was happy to go away.
I think that was smart. I'm not sure they could have won that case. If these people had videotaped the game and then paid for people to see it, that would be a clear-cut violation. But just sitting on your roof watching the game, I'm not sure that would violate any law.
Right. Yeah, it was hard. It seems like it would be, like you're stealing, and I think there was a case where they weren't allowed to put billboards up to block the view. They're like, oh no, you can't do that either. So it was, but it's like these are the kind of cases that you gather in your books where you have these wild wranglings. What hasn't made the book where you're like, man, I got to figure out how to get this case into the book?
Well, I as you suggested earlier, I do keep a file, and as I find an amusing case, I put it in a file, and then when I get ready to write my next book, I pull out my files and go through them and decide which ones I'm going to include. And yes, there are many amusing cases that haven't made it into the book. Realistically, I can do maybe develop 3 or 4 cases in each book, because it needs to be, how they get the case, what happens before the case goes to trial, what happens at trial. So I can do about 3 or 4 of those in any given book. So I certainly can't use all the material that I've stumbled onto.
Yeah. When you break down these stories, okay, so they have to meet the client and everything. I mean, how much of the story is outside of the courtroom?
As little as possible. I found, talking to friends and colleagues who've read the books, what they love most are the courtroom scenes, or occasionally deposition scenes, a Q&A. So since most of the clients are kind of wacky people, making wacky claims, I'm able to generate a lot of humor in the back and forth Q&A in court. And so I try to make the bulk of the books the courtroom goings on, as opposed to just what happens beforehand. Now, there are a lot of scenes. The Peters and Peters firm, they meet every Monday and talk about their cases, and who has an idea for the next crazy case. That happens throughout the book, and I try to make those scenes amusing, particularly with one of the associates. His name is Charles Pierpont III. He's known as Chip. He's never met a woman he hasn't been able to seduce very quickly, and his love life is a constant source of conversation at the firm at all the Monday meetings. So I'm able to develop a lot of humor into those meetings. But I would say my objective is to get the cases going into either a deposition or a courtroom where I can have Q&As with quirky questions and quirky answers.
That's fun. How much humor is there in a courtroom? I mean, I know from being in courtrooms, there's a lot of back and forth banter between lawyers, but it's private. Like you can't hear what they're saying, but they're clearly having a good time.
Yeah. There's not too much overt humor in the courtroom, frankly. Even the cases that I personally had that were amusing, they were amusing when you step back and looked at them at the end or 2 or 3 years later. But there's such high stakes involved when you go to court that you're not usually focused on having fun or making jokes. Now, sure, lawyers like to get on the good side of a judge and exchange pleasantries and maybe make minor jokes. But most of what goes on in the courtroom is really pretty serious, and there's very little time for humor. The humor in my cases, I found more retroactively once I sat back and looked at them.
Yeah. How do juries withstand humor? Do they like it, or do they?
Oh yeah. I mean, sitting on a jury is, for one thing, it's one of the most important things people do in their lives. On the other hand, it can be dreadfully dull because the proceedings can go on and on. There are endless breaks, endless conferences where the lawyers talk to the judge without the jury being there, or they're whispering at the bench. And so juries have a tough time keeping their attention. So anything you can do to engage the jury, including an occasional quip, is a good thing.
Yeah. You're right about it being very important. We love to talk about how we get out of jury duty, but it's like a right. It's an important thing. We get to judge ourselves as opposed to having somebody.
Absolutely. That's one of the good changes in the legal system. When I first started out, 55 years ago, anyone called for jury duty that had a decent job would spend a lot of time and money trying to get out of jury duty. And judges would allow that. So if you were an executive called for jury duty, you could probably get out of that jury duty. And you ended up with a pool that wasn't representative of the entire community. That began to change about, 20 or years later, when the judges realized that was not a good thing to let people get out of jury duty. And they needed to enforce the idea that this is a civic responsibility. And so that all changed. By the time I was close to retiring, I was trying cases where there were doctors and lawyers. I tried cases with lawyers on the jury. That would have never happened 50 years ago, but a lot of that is happening recently, and that's a good thing. You want a cross section of people. You want smart people on the jury. You don't want smart people being able to get off the jury because they have a business meeting or something.
Yeah. We seems like the courts just get filled up. Like, does anybody keep track on like how much capacity a court has? Because you can have a docket that's like months out into the future, and that seems to be maybe it's fast. Maybe it's my impression is wrong, but it can take a long time to get a basic case through the court system.
Your impression's absolutely correct. Most of my work was in the federal courts, and they keep very careful statistics. The number of cases filed, the number of cases that go to trial, the number of motion hearings. They have statistics for all of that. And they will occasionally use that to put pressure on Congress to appoint another judge, for example, in a district because the caseload is so high. What is a little bit different over the years is how few cases actually go to trial. When I started out practicing, an awful lot of cases went to trial all the time. But over time, cases became bigger and bigger. The stakes got higher and higher. And all of a sudden, companies were reluctant to roll the dice. And so the cases would eventually settle. And so the result of that is I think there are, I don't know the actual numbers, but I'm sure there are statistically fewer trials these days than there were 40 years ago, even though there are enormously more cases than there were in the past.
Right.
The cases just don't result in trials.
Is it better that it doesn't go the distance?
Well, that's a fair question. I always felt that I was lucky that the kind of cases I didn't lend themselves to settlements, and so they would frequently go to trial. I spent a lot of time doing cases in the trademark infringement field, the false advertising field, major corporations suing other major corporations. And it wasn't about money. It was about a principle. Can the defendant use that trademark that you think is infringing your mark? Can the defendant run that commercial that you think is flatly misleading? And you were just looking to get an injunction to stop the defendant's conduct. So, and because the cases weren't about money, it was difficult to settle them, and therefore they tended to go to trial. I always thought I was lucky to be in a field where so many cases went to trial. The kind of litigation I didn't really do much of was securities litigation or class action litigation or patent litigation involving huge patents where the stakes are so high, and those cases do tend to get settled just because the risk is so great. So far more securities litigation cases are settled, far more big patent cases are settled. I did do a handful of patent cases, but they were relatively simple patents that didn't involve zillions of dollars in damages. But yeah, the huge cases that are really you see in all the big cities and the big federal courts, those cases are much more likely to be settled than to go to trial these days.
If you're the kind of lawyer that takes a case all the way to the end, what's the least amount of winning a good lawyer can claim? Like, hey, like I'm better than 50-50, you know, I mean, is that a good lawyer? Because look, these cases aren't there because they're easy. They're there because they're hard.
Yeah.
You know, both sides go to the end because they think they've got a legitimate shot to win. So 50-50 is probably pretty close to a good winning percentage.
That's probably true, particularly if you're a defendant. I was generally on the plaintiff's side. And so if we either won the case or got a favorable settlement, that really counts as a win. When I was about 10 years into my practice with Patterson Belknap, the firm I spent most of my years with, there was a rumor in the firm that Morrison had never lost a case. Well, that wasn't true, but I didn't do anything to stop the rumor. I thought it was, kind of fun. But I did lose some cases, but I certainly won a lot more than I lost. Otherwise, you're not going to get your clients.
Right.
Clients don't want somebody who keeps losing cases.
Yeah. And going back to your characters now, they don't have the same kind of business demands, right? Because, they're fictional. And so how do they make their decisions on what they're going to take on? Like, do they want impossible cases? Do they want them because they're splashy? What makes them make a decision?
Well, there's a couple criteria. One is that the case is one that could be won, number one. Number two, it's a case against a defendant with relatively deep pockets that can afford to pay a big judgment or a big settlement. Mm-hmm. And then there's a little bit of difference between the brothers, Pap and Pup. Pap is sort of the alpha male, and he's the one who convinced Pup, his twin brother, to join him in this class action venture. Pap likes to do difficult cases, unique cases. Pup, that drives Pup crazy. Pup is very conservative. And for example, the chimpanzee cases, Pup knew there was no way in the end that they would be able to free the chimpanzees, and he didn't want any part of that. Pap said, no, this will be a lot of fun, and here's the other criteria: we'll get a lot of publicity about this.
Yes. Yeah.
And in the books, one of the traits of the Peters law firm is they have a big press conference after they file each of their lawsuits. And Pap, the alpha male, is very good at explaining the case to the press and getting them really interested in the lawsuits. So the potential for good press coverage is a criteria.
Pup must like since they're in the class action business, Pup must like the reward of holding the money as it sits there and grows, because someone has to be the bank for that class action pile of money. And it's always good to be the bank because you can legitimately make money being the bank.
Well, the problem is all of these cases, and this is true in the real world of class action litigation, you don't really get the lawyers don't get paid until the case is over. In almost every class action case, the lawyers have it on a contingency. It's usually
right.
Very generous contingency, 30, 35%. But they don't get their money till the case is over. Now, there has been a new development, and that is the presence of litigation funding firms. They started to surface about maybe 10 years before I retired. And these are frequently arms of big investment firms that set up little funds to fund litigation. And the idea is they'll take a case, for example, a patent case. Damages can be very high in a patent case, and they will fund the case by way of paying the hourly rates of the lawyers to litigate the case. There will still be more money at the end, but that's a way for the lawyers to get money as the case goes on. But that takes a very big case with a huge potential for damages, and a funding firm that's willing to front the money.
But doesn't in the class action world, the pile of money that is available to all of the people harmed in the case, and if it's 10 million people that have used the product, someone holds that money that has been awarded. And even if 10 million people are each getting $150, that money is sitting somewhere and it's growing.
Yeah, well, that's you're now getting into the area of who benefits from all these class action cases that get filed and get settled. And the answer is primarily the lawyers. Right. A perfect example is a case against Godiva Chocolates. That's both a real case and it's a case in my forthcoming book 3. Yeah. Yeah. And the issue is, are Godiva Belgian chocolates? They're actually made in Reading, Pennsylvania. So can you call them Belgian chocolates if they're made in Reading, Pennsylvania? That was a real life case, and Godiva settled it instead of going to trial, which was smart. They settled it for $15 million. Well, each member of the class got, I think it was $15.
Yeah, I love it.
Incredible.
Yeah, take your time. This is good.
Yeah. Yes. Each class member got $15. They got $25 if they had a proof of purchase that they bought the box of chocolates.
Right.
There were 2 named plaintiffs. The one plaintiffs who was the caption in the case, they each got $5,000. So that is very, very typical of class action cases. The lawyers make a big to-do. Oh, we're doing this to benefit all these poor consumers who were suckered and screwed by this horrible company. And then what do the plaintiffs get? They get $15 or $20. In the food cases, a lot of times they'll, or not just food cases, they'll get a coupon, a consumer coupon. So you get maybe $25 in a coupon to buy another box of whatever it was you bought before. And the real winners in those cases are the lawyers. That's where the real money goes, and that's why class actions are growing and growing, because more and more lawyers see that as a way to make a lot of big bucks.
Yeah, yeah. If you were to start your career again, would you pick a similar direction? Like, did it work out the right way for you, or you think like, man, I would actually go this direction instead?
Actually, the direction I took worked out perfectly for me, and I could not have had a better career. I'm really lucky and thankful. The difference, though, is if I were starting over again, I don't think I would start it in the big city, because what's changed is in the big city, Chicago, LA, New York, Philadelphia, these enormous big firms, and they represent big corporations in these big cases that never go to trial. And that wasn't the way the practice was when I started 50 years ago. So if I were doing it over again, I would probably go to a smaller city where there are smaller cases, but more chance to get into court and actually try cases. That's what I would do differently.
And would you punch out earlier and start writing sooner?
It depends. I guess depends on how I was doing.
Yeah.
I don't. I wasn't anxious to stop practicing. I mean, I was in the JAG Corps for 4 years, and then I was with a series of New York firms for the next 45 years.
Right.
By that 49th year, I was pretty much ready to stop, but I can't say that 5 years earlier I should have stopped or wanted to stop.
Right.
I think it worked out for me. I was ready to stop, and I was ready to go back to trying to write some books.
When you finish a book, do you expect your friends and family to read it, or is it not for them at all? Because like with my show, my friends they kind of watch, right? But it's not for them, right? It's for other people who get me.
My friends and family better read the books.
I love it. Yeah.
One thing I do, I get about 50 advanced copies of the book before they're actually published, and I send them to family and former colleagues, ask them to read it, and then if they like the book, to post a review on Amazon, because you got to generate nice reviews on Amazon.
That's right.
And I tell them, even if you don't like it, please post a good review anyway.
Right.
Nobody will know that you didn't like it. So I have a little nudge to get this cadre of people to read the books. But the interesting thing is, most of the people who read the first book urged me to continue writing. And one guy just got an email from a friend who said, I told him I was sending him the new book. He said he runs out to see the postman every day to see if the books arrive. Wow.
Yeah. Who does that anymore?
Yeah, I know. Who even has a mailman that comes to the house?
Right. I mean, thinking about something actually coming in your actual mailbox that makes you excited, that's just hardly ever happens now.
I know.
Yeah. Do you like satire? Is that like your home comedy genre, do you think?
Well, for writing, yes. Here's an interesting part of my life. I always have loved novels, and I always wanted to write a novel, going back to probably law school and beyond. When I was in the Air Force, I actually had a lot of free time on my hands. So I decided to write a spy novel. Now, what do I know about spies? You may know about spies, but
sure.
All I know is what I saw on TV or in the movies. And luckily, that book never saw the light of day. But when I was, my final year in the Air Force was spent in Korea. I was a non-career officer, and the Air Force sent the non-career JAG officers either to Vietnam or Korea for their second assignment. I got to Korea. In any event, on the flight to Korea, which took forever, I began reading Joseph Heller's Catch-22, and I was totally captivated by that book. Here was an author poking fun at the Army Air Corps, which, played a major role, serious role in World War II. And every character in the book, every situation, every character name was farcical. And I marveled at Heller's ability to turn everything into farce. So when I decided that I wanted to write just before I retired and took this new career up, my model really was Heller and what he did with Catch-22. And that became my inspiration. So I do like satire, but it really came about in that way of wanting to do to the legal profession what Joseph Heller did to the Army Air Corps.
I love it. Do you have any aspirations on these things getting picked up and turned into a movie or a serialized kind of drama or comedy kind of thing?
My publisher does.
Okay, good. That's a good sign.
He does. Whether that will happen, who knows? It just seems like there's so much demand for content these days that perhaps it would happen. It's hard for me to judge the appeal of these books to a younger audience. I mean, I'm pretty sure that the demographics of my readers skew to 40, 50 and over, as opposed to 18, 20 and 30-year-olds. Sure. So whether that would lend itself to any kind of a TV or streaming series, I don't know. But one can always hope.
There've always been shows that are preferred by older crowds, and there's a lot of older people, that want to watch things that are not young things, So like Matlock comes to mind, and Angela Lansbury shows, and even though Golden Girls is kind of universal, there's certain things. Ironside, that was a show that was older, kind of show for a lot of people. Anyhow, there's a spot for something like that, and then channels are so demographically driven anymore. So maybe you will. And look, it's such a long shot anyhow to get something made into something. It's a major miracle to get something made at all, let alone have it be a hit and get made again or something. Right.
Yeah, I'm content with having the books be out there. It would be wonderful if it would eventually get picked up for TV or cable or streaming, but I'm not going to hold my breath for that to happen.
How long until the next book comes out? You've got this one out right now. Here, by the way, here's the link, everybody, to get his book. But how long will you let this one sit before the next one goes out?
I'll probably start writing the next one around Christmas and thereafter. As you can imagine, I'm fairly busy right now with promotional work on this book, but I'm accumulating material for the next book in the series. I have a fellow who helps me with anything computer related. Given my age, computers aren't my strong suit, although I inputted the entire book onto my computer. In any event, my computer guy wants me to incorporate AI into the next book. So I'm starting to accumulate materials on that. Just for example, an AI bot lawyer made the list of the 100 best lawyers in America.
Yeah. It's a real thing. And if you combine two celebrities, Johnny Cash and somebody else, and they sing a song and it goes viral, well, who do you pay?
Yes, and there's already a lot of litigation surfacing on those kinds of cases. So I think the field will be ripe for plucking in that area.
There is a guy who took every single note pattern and released it. And all of it as a song. So anything that wasn't already covered is now covered in terms of, that's my tune. That's my harmony. That's my thing. and he just had a computer just make it, make all of it and just released it. Yeah. And so he's like, all of those things are my thing. But then he released it into the public domain. And so he's like, there's no argument anymore on who owns what because we've created all of it.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's terrible.
It's funny. Like, destroying IP before it's even made it or even, it's crazy. Yeah.
There was just a story in the paper about a week or so ago. A lawyer in New York in a real case in New York State Court turned in a brief that had been generated solely by AI, and the brief got everything wrong. It had cases that had nothing to do with the point at issue, and the judge was furious, and he sanctioned the lawyer. But can you imagine a lawyer just saying, "I'm going to turn to AI to generate my brief"?
It's crazy. It's crazy. Yeah. I like that sanction. You normally have to say good sanction or bad sanction, but in this case, we knew what you were talking about. It wasn't a good sanction. Right. It was a bad one. Right. Hey, I've run out of questions for you. Do you have any questions for me?
Well, yeah. How did you get from being a spy on all these missions in Iraq and Afghanistan to hosting shows with authors and musicians? I don't quite get the transition.
It's honestly, it's the same thing. It's just a different end, So I would go out every day on patrols. I would know the questions that I'd know what the commander wanted to know. Am I winning or am I losing? And so I just kind of reframed all of it. How do you find people that want to talk? Well, look, people who write academic papers want to talk about their paper. So they say yes. People who write books want to talk about their books. Musicians who no one ever asks ever, they're like, yeah, I'll do an interview with you. Sure. I'd love to talk about my work. And so you just build up this network of people. And it really, quite honestly, it's the same skill set, just with a different end in mind. And that's how it got going. And plus, I have a lot of stories myself. And so it was a chance for me to run my mouth and tell my stories and share some very interesting experiences and points of view based upon those experiences.
Right. So, but what triggered your decision to make this transition into this field?
I was tired of being deployed all the time. I was using up all of my life, and I was recognizing that I was identifying with the Desperado and the song Desperado, where nothing was too cold, nothing was too hot, and I was burning up my life.
Oh boy.
And rolling the dice, so I'm like, I got to go do something else. And so I also was sick of living in the threat world where everything was a threat and everything was coming after you all the time. And that wasn't that was the people around me saw the world like that. And I'm like, that's not the world that I see. Yes, the world that I see is dangerous and that kind of thing. But if all you see is threat and danger, then again, you're burning up your life and you're not seeing the real world. And so I wanted to go out and show people there's a different world out there.
Well, I have a world of respect for any serviceman or woman who's been in Iraq, Afghanistan. I mean, my gosh, boy, the country owes them a huge debt of gratitude.
Oh, well, thanks, man. From all of us, if I can speak for all of us, we all appreciate that. Let's try to do less fighting. Let's try to do less messing around and get more things right. That's the other thing is how can I help us get it right more often? That's a big responsibility that I feel that I have since I've seen us get it wrong. How do we get it right?
Yeah.
So that's it. That's the story. And I got to do it. I got to have a really cool job, and now I have a really cool job. And it's sort of hard to have me do anything that's not really cool because I've been fortunate in my career to get to do some really exciting things. And so here we are.
Well, I feel the same. I feel very fortunate about my earlier career, my current career. The good thing is neither of them were as dangerous as what you were doing.
Yeah, well, that's
My only danger was losing a case and then losing a client.
Yeah.
A little different from the danger you probably face.
Yeah, there's some crazy danger that you get involved in my line of work. But like a lawyer, I've got to have that gift of gab, and I've got to look. I led with trust. If I can build trust, it really didn't matter who I met, and if my number was up, my number was up. My number was never up, and so, here I am. It's dangerous, yes, but undoable. No, I was able to figure it out somehow, some way, through a lot of trial and error.
Well, congratulations. That's really terrific.
Yeah. Anything in closing before we wrap this thing up? Everybody definitely go get the book. You know my deal. Let's buddy read this thing. You get it, I'll get it. We'll read it together and we'll compare notes. Anything in closing, Tom?
Well, I would just say this. Anyone of any age, of any persuasion, of any occupation who's looking for a good laugh, I think you'll enjoy the book or any of the 3 books in the series. And one last thought, they do poke a lot of fun at the class action industry, and they show the abuses of the class action system. But that really wasn't the purpose of writing the books. The purpose of writing the books was to make people laugh. I think we need more laughter in the world today, and I hope that these books will contribute in their small way to that.
I love it. All right, stand by. I'll say goodbye to you in a second here.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours.